passed the first 10 days very quietly in my retreat, loaded with the most touching marks of friendship. My kind protectors sought above all to ease my mind. As long as I remained with them, I had, they said, no danger to fear. I might stay whole months in my hiding place without putting them to the least inconvenience. I was, however, not of the same opinion. Monsieur Badiou, who came now and then to see me, could not dissemble that the activity of the police had not relaxed in the least, that they were certain that I had not crossed the frontiers either at Strasbourg or at Metz. General Exelsmann, who was an outlaw and had fled to Brussels, wrote to his wife as a great secret, as soon as he had heard the history of my flight, that he had just supped with me. The anecdote was industriously circulated, but the police were not deceived by it. It was in Paris that they continued their searches. My friends were watched with a strictness inspired by the hope of a considerable reward. Monsieur Berton de Vaux, then Secretary General of the Police, explained to Monsieur Badiou the hidden cause of so obstinate a persecution. The Ultra Party accused the minister of having yielded to old connections of friendship with me and to the wish of making a merit of my flight in the eyes of Louis Bonaparte and his whole family, and thus ensuring himself a title of gratitude for some future contingency. These absurd charges might come to the ears of the king, and Monsieur de Cazes, fearing above all things to lose his credit and perhaps to fall beneath the hatred to which he was exposed, augmented from day to day the activity of his inquiries. These absurd charges might come to the ears of the king, and Monsieur de Cazes, fearing above all things to lose his credit, and perhaps to fall beneath the hatred to which he was exposed, augmented from day to day the activity of his inquiries. It was therefore necessary for me to fly. But by what means? It was proposed that I should go once more in the garb of the other sex and go secretly to a seaport where smugglers would undertake to convey me to England. I rejected that plan as quite extravagant. Neither did it please Badiou. A few days afterwards, he came and told me that a Russian general offered to take charge of me, that I should be conducted to his inn during the night and then concealed in the back of his carriage. Thus I might pass the barrier without any accident. But for that, I was to lay down 8,000 francs to pay his debts, and then take upon... Doing it again. These absurd charges might come to the ears of the king, and Monsieur de Cazes, fearing above all things to lose his credit, and perhaps to fall beneath the hatred to which he was exposed, augmented from day to day the activity of his inquiries. It was therefore necessary for me to fly. But by what means? It was proposed that I should once more assume the garb of the other sex and go secretly to the seaport where smugglers would undertake to convey me to England. I rejected that plan as quite extravagant. Neither did it please Badiou. A few days afterwards, he came and told me that a Russian general offered to take charge of me, that I should be conducted to his inn during the night and then concealed in the back of his carriage. Thus I might pass the barrier without any accident. But for that, I first was to lay down 8,000 francs to pay his debts, and then take upon me all the expenses of the journey. The money was ready, but the plan miscarried. The Russian wanted to know the name of the outlaw, and when he heard it, the fear of being sent to Siberia in case I were discovered made him draw back. After that, it was proposed that I should join a battalion of Bavarian soldiers that were going to leave France by trusting my secret to the commander, who would undoubtedly be very glad to save a relation and friend of Prince Eugene. This plan appeared unobjectionable to me. I too well knew the King of Bavaria to fear that the officer would be punished, and that excellent prince to whom I mentioned the fact a few months afterwards said to me with emotion, I would have attached him to my person if he had succeeded in saving you. But I was also obliged to abandon this project. The police, having guessed that I might make resort to it, watched the troop with so much vigilance that the officers were completely circumvented, that it became quite impossible to have any connection with them. At last, on the 18th day after I had left prison, Badiou came to me with a joyful countenance and embraced me, saying, We shall at last succeed. Some Englishmen have offered to serve you, and I believe they possess the means of doing so. These are the particulars of what had happened. The Princess de Vademont, uneasy at knowing me still to be in Paris, though she was not acquainted with the place of my concealment, looked about for persons who might help me away. She spoke of her anxiety to Madame de Saint-Aignan Caulaincourt, one of the cleverest women born in France, whose kindness is inexhaustible and whose courage is unbounded. She proposed to the princess to sound a young Englishman, Mr. Bruce, who used to visit both their houses. Bruce, delighted at the idea of saving an unfortunate man who had escaped the scaffold in so wonderful a manner, accepted with enthusiasm the proposal of the ladies and went immediately to consult Sir Robert Wilson on the subject. Sir Robert shared his young friend's enthusiasm. He had failed in his attempt to save Marshal Ney, but he hoped to take his revenge in my case. He made quite a military expedition of the business, and as Bruce was not in the army, it became necessary to find one or two officers, independent men of liberal opinions, who might be disposed to play off a good trick on the government of the Bourbons. The road to Belgium by Valenciennes was especially assigned to the English army, and it was therefore chosen for my escape. They asked no more than 2 days to finish their preparations. I received a very particular instruction concerning my dress. No mustachios, an English wig, my beard shaved very clean after the manner of the officers of that nation, a greatcoat with buttons of the English guards. The regimentals and hat were to be given me at the instant of our departure. The regimentals and hat were to be given me at the instant of our departure. We held council, and, as it occurs in most cases, our first steps were wrong. It was looked upon as very necessary to get my coat made by the tailor of an English regiment, but he would want my measure. My friend Stanislaus took it with fine white paper, and instead of the notches that the tailors are accustomed to make, he wrote on it, length of the forearm, breadth of the breast, etc., in a fine, neat hand, and carried it boldly to the tailor of the regiment of the guards. He quickly made the coat, however, not without observing that the measure had not been taken by a tailor. Monsieur Bresson had been to buy me another greatcoat at an old clothes shop, and was naturally obliged to measure it on himself. He was, however, tall and thin, so that in less than 48 hours I had 2 coats, neither of which could be of any service to me. I had no boots, and all our speculations were useless in contriving to procure me a pair. I was forced to put on a pair belonging to Monsieur Bresson. They were at least 2 inches longer than my foot. I could scarcely walk in them, and we all laughed much at the awkward figure I cut. On the 9th of January, 1816, at 8 o'clock in the evening, I at last took leave of my kind friends. We were all very much affected, and particularly myself, who was leaving them with so little hope of ever seeing them again. I did, however, meet them again. I write this at 20 minutes' walk from a delightful country seat on the right bank of the Seine, which they inhabit the whole year through. I see them every day. They are happy and independent. Fedora, their only daughter, is married to Monsieur de Montjoyeux, an amiable young man. They have 2 pretty children, and Fedora is one of the cleverest, handsomest, and most agreeable women I know. I take some pleasure in thinking that the happiness this family enjoy is partly the reward of their generous and courageous conduct towards me. After I had embraced them, Messieurs Bresson and Badiou brought me to the corner of the Rue de Grenelle, where I found again the faithful Chassanon with his cabriolet. In going to my destination, we crossed the Place du Carrousel. I could not help smiling when I passed so near the numerous sentries stationed along the railings of the Tuileries, and when I saw the place lighted up and filled, as I had reason to imagine, with people enraged at not being able to seize me, while I was not more than 50 yards from them. We stopped at a house in the Rue de Elder, near the boulevard. There I took leave of my friend Chassanon. As I walked slowly up the stairs, I was surprised at meeting Mademoiselle Duberg. There would have been too much danger in our appearing to know each other. I afterwards learned that she was going to Monsieur Dupuis, my reporting judge, who lived on the second floor of the house, so that I was going to pass the night under the same roof with the magistrate who had during my trial examined me twice at length and with great severity. This circumstance, however, by no means troubled me. Monsieur Dupuis was an honorable man to whom I had shown no reserve, who was convinced of my innocence and did not fear to declare it openly with an energy that might be hurtful to his fortune. When I reached the first floor, I saw before me a gentleman of tall stature and noble features. It was Sir Robert Wilson. He introduced me to two persons who were expecting me in the parlor. In one of the two, I recognized Mr. Bruce, whom I had met sometimes during the preceding winter at the Duchess de St. Louis, Hortense's. Mr. Hutchinson, to whom the apartments belonged, was a captain in the English Guards. He received me in a friendly manner. We seated ourselves round a bowl of punch. Our conversation turned on public affairs, and we talked with as much ease and freedom as if we had been together in London. These gentlemen did not appear to entertain the least uneasiness in respect to our next day's journey, and at last, after sitting for about an hour, Sir Robert and Mr. Bruce rose, and the former, shaking hands with me, said, "Be up tomorrow by 6 o'clock, and be very careful about your dress. You will find here the coat of a captain in the Guards, which you must put on. At 8 o'clock precisely, I shall expect you at the door. As for me," said Bruce, "I am going to spend 3 days at the country seat of the Princess de la Moskova, for you will not want me any longer. My wishes go along with you, and I shall receive accounts from you by my friends." When they were gone, Mr. Hutchinson offered me his bed, but I had no desire to sleep, and I laid myself down on a sofa. While my host was lying in a profound sleep, I looked about the apartments to find a corner where I might conceal myself in case the police should come and pay us a visit. But it was very scantily furnished. It consisted only of 2 rooms and a closet. It would have been impossible to elude, even for a quarter of an hour, the most superficial search. I opened the window to ascertain the distance I was from the street. That distance was too considerable for me to leap. I could not hope to save myself after my fall, and still too near the ground for me to be killed at once. Fortunately, I recollected the pistols Monsieur de Chassanon had given me. I took one of them in my hands and examined it with care. I placed it under my pillow and was as easy after that as if I had had in my possession the surest talisman. I soon fell asleep, but about 1 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened by a great noise and a very animated conversation that was taking place at the carriage door of the house. By listening, I discovered that somebody wanted to get in. I immediately awoke my companion and said, "I believe I'm discovered. Some person wishes to get into the house." Mr. Hutchinson went out of the apartment in the calmest manner, and in about 5 minutes, which appeared horribly long to me, he came back saying, "It is only a dispute between the portress and a French officer who lives on the 3rd floor. She's complaining that he comes home too late. So let us go to sleep again without fear." At last, after having counted every hour of the night, I heard 6 o'clock strike. I immediately set about my toilet. At 8 o'clock precisely, I found Sir Robert Wilson in the street, dressed in his full regimentals and seated in a pretty gig. Mr. Hutchinson soon appeared also on horseback, and we set off. The weather was beautiful. All the shops were open, everybody in the streets, and by a singular coincidence, they were just at that moment putting up the place de grève, the gibbet, which, according to custom, is used to execute in effigy persons declared guilty in contumacy. We entered the Rue de Clichy, which leads to the barrier of the same name. As I had on the regimentals and cap of the Guards, the English soldiers we met saluted us in the military manner. 2 officers we met on the road appeared very much surprised at seeing us with Sir Robert, one of their comrades with whom they were unacquainted. But Mr. Hutchinson went up to them and talked to them while we were approaching the barrier. To the right and to the left were 2 guardhouses, the one English and the other French. The soldiers drew up under arms. Fortunately, the French were National Guards, and it was not probable they could know me, as they did not belong to my quarter of the town. We crossed the barrier with a slow step, and when we were out, I thanked Sir Robert with as much gratitude as if we had crossed the barriers of the kingdom. We went on thus to the village of La Chapelle. There we were obliged to take another horse to be able to go to Compiègne. This horse had been baited at a large inn. When we approached the house, we perceived 4 gendarmes standing in front of the door. Sir Robert went up to them. They separated that we might pass, and to prevent them from paying attention to us, Mr. Hutchinson began a conversation with them. His inquiries were chiefly directed to the number of stables and the quantity of forage and lodgings that were to be found in the village, from all which they concluded that English troops were expected, and one of them invited the English captain to accompany him to the mayor. "Not at present," he answered. "I'm going forward to meet the wagons, and in 2 hours I shall be back." The conversation could not last very long with an Englishman who knew but little of our language, but the horse was quickly changed, and we had the satisfaction on going away to exchange salutes with the gendarmes. I then learned that the man who had brought us thus far belonged to Monsieur Auguste de Saint-Aignan. On the road we met with several gendarmes in pursuit of malefactors or bearing military correspondence. They all fixed their eyes on us without suspecting anything. I had accustomed myself on seeing them to shut my eyes, but with the precaution of placing my hand on my pistol, fully resolved, if I should be recognized and apprehended, to blow my brains out, for it would have been too great a stupidity to suffer myself to be brought back to Paris. We arrived at last at Compiègne. At the entrance of the suburb stood a non-commissioned English officer who, on seeing his general, turned to the right and marched with gravity through several small streets until he stopped at a small house in a very lonely part of the town. There we found an officer who received us very well, and we waited for Sir Robert's carriage, which Mr. Wallace was to bring from Paris for him. That officer had ordered post horses for General Wallace, brother-in-law to Sir Robert Wilson, who traveled under his name. Mr. Wallace arrived at about 6 o'clock, after having been followed a great part of the way by the gendarmes. We had not an instant to lose. The carriage advanced rapidly. We experienced a great delay at Condé in getting through the town, but it was during the night. At last, next morning at 7 o'clock, we arrived at Valenciennes, the last French city on that frontier. I was beginning to feel more easy when the postmaster told us to go and have our passports examined by the captain of the gendarmerie. "You forgot, I suppose, to read who we were," said Sir Robert calmly. "Let the captain come here if he chooses to see us." The postmaster felt how wrongly he had acted, and taking our passports, he went himself to get them signed. As it was very long before he came back, I began to be tormented by a most horrible anxiety. Was I going to be wrecked in that harbor? Suppose the officer of the gendarmes were to come himself to verify the signatures and to apprehend me. Fortunately, the weather was very cold. It was scarcely daylight, and the officer signed the passports without rising from his bed. We got out of the gate. On the glacis, the officer of the preventative service wanted to see whether we were in order, but having satisfied his curiosity, we went on and stopped no more. We flew along the beautiful Brussels road. From time to time, I looked through the back window to see whether we were not pursued. My impatience augmented with every turn of the wheels. The postilions showed us at a distance a large house that was the Belgian custom house. I fixed my eyes on that edifice, and it seemed to me as if it remained always equally far off. I imagined that the postilion did not get on. I was ashamed of my impatience, but it was impossible for me to curb it. At last, we reached the frontier. We were on the Belgian territory. I was saved. I pressed the hands of Sir Robert and expressed to him with deep emotion the extent of my gratitude. But he, keeping up his gravity, only smiled without answering me. About half an hour afterwards, he turned to me and said, in the most serious tone possible, "Now, Pray tell me, my dear friend, why did you not like to be guillotined?" I stared at him with astonishment and made no reply. "Yes," he continued, "they say you had solicited as a favor that you might be shot." It is very true. When a man is guillotined, they put him in a cart with his hands bound behind his back. And when he's on the scaffold, they tie him fast to a plank, which they lower to let it slip thus under the knife. Ah, I understand you. You did not like to have your throat cut like a calf. We arrived at Mons at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we stopped at the best inn. While dinner was preparing, I wrote a few letters, of which Sir Robert was kind enough to take charge. And after having gone with me to buy some things I wanted, and having given me 2 letters, one for the King of Prussia and the other for Mr. Lamb, the English resident in Munich, we separated. He returned to Paris, and I go farther into Germany and try to reach Bavaria.